The Gambler by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Retold by Catherine Sklerova. Chapter 1. Finally, I returned from a 2-week holiday. I found out that my patrons had arrived to Roulette 3 days prior. I received from them a welcome quite different to which I had expected. They welcomed me quite coldly. The general greeted me indifferently and sent me to pay my respects to his sister. It was clear that money had been found from somewhere. I thought I could even see a shameful expression in the general's glance. His sister Maria Filipovna treated me very coldly as well. Nevertheless, she took the money which I handed to her, counted it, and listened to what I had to tell her. She was very busy with domestic duties and greeted me indifferently as well. Nevertheless, she told me that day my patron had expected some guests for lunch. They were a Monsieur Menzestov, a French lady, and an Englishman. Whenever my patron got some money, he usually arranged a big banquet for his family and his friends. When Polina Alexandrovna saw me, she asked me why I had been so long away. Then she departed without waiting for my answer. Well, I think I need to explain my position in the general suite. I lived in a small room on the 4th floor of the hotel. I belonged to the general suite. I was a Russian teacher for his children. As far as I could see, the general and his family had already become famous in Roulette. The general was a Russian nobleman of great wealth. I was about to take Misha and Nadia, the general's children, for a walk when one of the servants told me that the general wished to see me. I went to his study at once. I noticed that he avoided looking me in the eyes. He looked a bit confused. There was a short silence. Finally he turned to me with a serious look. "Where are you going to take the children today?" he asked. "I hope you will not take them to casino to play roulette. I know that you are addicted to gambling. Though I am not your mentor, I want to speak plainly with you." "I have no money for gambling," I replied. "You will get some soon," he said, redeeming a little and opening one of the drawers on his desk. He put my salary, 120 rubles, on the desk and looked at me seriously. "Let's calculate," he said. "I must convert these rubles into gulden. Here, take 100 gulden. The rest will be safe in my hands." I took my money in silence. "You must not be offended at what I say. What I have said simply as a warning. It is my right to protect your money from gambling. You are too touchy about these things. You know it, don't you?" I left his study without saying a word. I took his children to the park to have a walk. When I returned home with children before lunch, I saw splendid carriages of our party. I saw Mademoiselle Blanche, Maria Filipovna, and Polina Alexandrovna in one of them, and the Frenchman, the Englishman, and the general in the order. The passers-by stopped to look at them because they looked so splendid. I calculated that the members of the party must have had a total of at least 7,000 or 8,000 francs with them, though that would be not too much for Mademoiselle Blanche. The latter was also living in our hotel with her mother, Madame la Comtesse. The Frenchman was living in the hotel too. I knew very well that the Frenchman would take no notice of me when we met at lunch, and that the general would not introduce me to his guests. However, the Frenchman had once lived in Russia and knew that a teacher is very respected here. Of course, I was an invited guest at lunch. The general had forgotten to arrange otherwise. When the Frenchman asked about me, my patron sent for me immediately. When I entered the dining room, the general smiled at me, and Maria Filipovna herself showed me my place. I said that I had met Mr. Astley before. This fact saved me, and since then I figured out as one of the company. Mr. Astley nodded in agreement, and I joined them. This Englishman I had met first in Prussia, and then in France and Switzerland. And that day I met him again in Roulette. I had met him twice within 2 weeks. Never in my life I had met such a shy person. He was not a fool. He was a clever, noble, and friendly man. On our first meeting in Prussia, he had told me that he had just been to the North Cape and wished now to visit the fair at Nizhny Novgorod. I didn't know how he had made the general's acquaintance, but he was much struck with Polina's appearance. He was glad that I sat next to him at the table. During the meal, the Frenchman was talkative and kind to everyone. He talked about finance and Russian politics. The general tried to contradict him sometimes, simply not to lose his own dignity. As for me, I was in a curious mood. I asked myself same question many times. Why do I work for the general instead of leaving him and his family? Now and then I looked at Polina Alexandrovna, but she paid me no attention. Soon I became so irritated that I suddenly decided to join the general conversation. Above everything, I wanted to quarrel with the Frenchman. "I have noticed one thing," I said, turning to the Frenchman. This summer, it is almost impossible for a Russian to dine anywhere at tables stowed. Even if you are a respected Russian gentleman, you must put up with insults of every kind, both in Paris and Germany and even in Switzerland. At these table stodes, a Russian cannot say a word. This I said in French. The general looked at me in astonishment. He was angry with me. Of course, one always learns something from everywhere, said Frenchman. Moreover, one day I had to depart for Rome on business. I continued. I went to the embassy in Paris to get a visa for my passport. There I met a secretary of about 50 years old and asked him to lead me to Monsieur. He listened to my story with great attention and asked me to wait a little. I was in a great hurry to depart, but I sat down and began to wait silently. Shortly I heard someone enter the same room, and then he also asked for Monsieur. The secretary made a low bow to the visitor and led him to Monsieur. When the visitor left the embassy, I reminded the secretary of my own business. He asked me to wait again. Soon a second visitor arrived, who, like myself, came to Monsieur to get a visa. As soon as he explained the reason of his visit, he was led to Monsieur immediately. This made me very angry. I rose, came closer to the secretary, and told him that Monsieur should finish my business as well. He was surprised at my behavior. He put a tray of coffee down on the table. He looked me up and down and said, "Do you suppose that Monsieur is going to put aside his coffee for any Russian like you? Then I'm going to spit into his coffee if you don't give him my passport. I will spit into his coffee and take it to Monsieur myself." He rushed to the door and spread out his arms as if he would rather die than let me enter the room. I told him that I was a gentleman without manners. In a word, I showed him that I was not going to give up. He looked at me angrily, then took my passport and went upstairs with it. A minute later, my passport has been visaed. I can show you the Roman visa in my passport if you want. But, began the general, what really helped you was the fact that you proclaimed yourself a gentleman without manners, said the Frenchman with a smile. But is that how Russians ought to be treated? I continued. Nonsense. So many Russians live in Paris and they are ready even to deny the fact that they are Russians. Nobody said anything. I decided to change the subject of our conversation. At my hotel in Paris, I received more attention from the company after one story. I continued. A fat Polish nobleman and a Frenchman were present at the table d'hôte. I told them that 2 years ago I had met a man at whom in 1812 a Frenchman fired for fun. That man was then a boy of 10 and his family are still living in Moscow. Impossible, the Frenchman cried. No French soldier would fire at a child. Nevertheless, the incident was as I say, I said. A very respected captain told me the story, and I myself could see the scar left on his cheek. The Frenchman then began to talk loudly and the general supported him, but I recommended the Frenchman to read extracts from his memories of General Pravorsky, who in 1812 was a prisoner in the hands of the French. Finally, Maria Filipovna said something to interrupt the conversation. The general was angry with me for having started the discussion with the Frenchman. On the other hand, Mr. Astley seemed to like my chat with the Frenchman. Rising from the table, he proposed that we should go and have dinner together. I nodded in agreement. The same afternoon, at 4 o'clock, I went to have a walk with Polina Alexandrovna. We entered the park, where Polina seated herself on a bench near the fountain. Polina and I were alone at the time. Nadia and Misha went away to play by another fountain. We began to talk about business matters. Polina was angry when I handed her only 700 gulden because she had thought to receive at least 2,000 guldens or even more. "Come what may," she said, "I must have money. I will get it somehow, otherwise I will be ruined." I asked her what happened during my absence. "Nothing. 2 pieces of news have reached us from St. Petersburg. My grandmother is very ill. Probably she will live a week or 2. We had this news from Timothy Petrovich himself, and he is a reliable person. Every day we expect to receive news of her death." "Do all of you expect this news?" I asked. "Of course, all of us, and every minute of the day. We all have been waiting for her death for a year and a half. I am not her blood relation. I am just the general's stepdaughter. Yet I hope that the old lady did not forget me in her will." "Yes, I think you will get a good deal," I said with some assurance. "Yes, because she loves me." "Do the Frenchman and the Englishman also know your family secrets?" I asked. "And why are you yourself so interested in them?" she asked coldly. "Never mind. If I am not mistaken, the general has succeeded in borrowing money of the Frenchman. It may be so. It is likely that the Frenchman would have lent the money if he had not known something about your grandmother?" I asked. Yes, that is true. As soon as he learned that I was likely to inherit something from her, he began to pay me his addresses. I was silent for a while. Where did you meet this Englishman, Mr. Astley? He is very shy, also he is in love with you. I knew you would ask about him. Yes, he is in love with me. I know that, and he is 10 times richer than the Frenchman. In fact, does the Frenchman possess? It is very doubtful that he possessed anything at all. Oh no, there is doubt about it, I said. He possesses some mansion or other. Last night the general told me that. Are you satisfied now? Why should I? Because the Frenchman is handsome and rich, besides he's a man of honor. If that's so, yes, absolutely, I replied. I did not like this conversation. She knew very well how much I loved her. I was angry with her. I love you more than anybody else can love, I said. Polina was not pleased what I was saying. She looked at me reproachfully, then she laughed and said, Last time you told me on the Schallenberg that at my word you would jump down into abyss. Some day I may remind you of that saying. Yes, believe me, I will remind you of that. I hate you because you are necessary to me. I need you now, so I must keep you. Then she made a movement to stand up. Her voice sounded very angry. May I ask you who this Mademoiselle Blanche is? I asked. I didn't wish Paulina to depart without an explanation. She is just a Mademoiselle Blanche, Paulina answered. Probably she will soon be Madame General. That is to say, if the grandmother dies in the nearest time. Mademoiselle Blanche knows very well, as things stand now, we are ruined. And is the General in love with her? I asked. Well, that has nothing to do with it. Listen to me. Take my 100 gulden and go to play roulette with them. Win as much for me as you can, because I need money very much. As she said this, she rose and called the children back to her side. They walked away quickly. I felt confused when she told me to go and play roulette. I began to think about my love for her. In fact, during 2 weeks of my absence, I saw her in my dreams every night. Did I really love her? I was sure of my love for her, but at the same time I hated her. Nevertheless, I was ready to jump into the abyss with great pleasure. Yes, this I knew very well. I could die for her in a moment. I knew also very well that she was absolutely inaccessible for me. She was a noble, clever, careful woman, and I was simply nothing in her eyes. But my love made her very pleased for sure. She looked at me in the same way as an empress did at her servant, without counting her slave as a man. Yes, Paulina took me for something less than a man. Still, she had given me a duty to win as much as I could at roulette. Yet I didn't know why it was necessary for her to win something and what new ideas seemed to have arisen during the last 2 weeks. Well, I needed to discover her ideas as soon as possible, but now, first, I must go to the roulette table right away.